What if I told you that the difference between people who live wholehearted lives and those who struggle isn't their ability to avoid falling? It's their ability to rise strong after they fall. Today, we're diving deep into Rising Strong by Dr. Brené Brown, a book that has revolutionized how millions understand resilience, vulnerability, and the courage to get back up. Dr. Brené Brown spent over 2 decades researching shame, vulnerability, and courage at the University of Houston. She's delivered one of the top 5 most viewed TED Talks of all time, and her work has transformed how we think about human connection and emotional strength. In Rising Strong, Brown reveals the 3-step process that people use to navigate through failure, setbacks, and disappointments, not just to recover, but to rise stronger than before. She discovered that the people who bounce back from difficult experiences share a specific set of practices that anyone can learn. If you're tired of being knocked down by life's inevitable challenges, if you want to transform your relationship with failure and disappointment, then these next 45 minutes contain the research-backed strategies that Dr. Brown found in her extensive studies of resilience. The truth is, we all fall. We all face moments of disappointment, heartbreak, and failure. But as Dr. Brown says in Rising Strong, our capacity for wholeheartedness can never be greater than our willingness to be brokenhearted. This isn't about avoiding pain, it's about learning to rise strong from it. Chapter 1, The Physics of Vulnerability, Understanding Why We Fall. Dr. Brené Brown opens Rising Strong with a powerful truth. If we are brave enough often enough, we will fall. This isn't a warning, it's a promise. And more importantly, it's the foundation for understanding resilience. In her research at the University of Houston, Brown discovered that the people who live the most fulfilling lives aren't those who avoid failure. They're the ones who have learned to navigate it effectively. She calls this the physics of vulnerability. Think about it. Every time you take a risk, whether it's starting a new relationship, launching a business, speaking up in a meeting, or simply being authentic about who you are, you're making yourself vulnerable to potential failure or rejection. The problem most people face is that they try to eliminate vulnerability from their lives. They build walls, avoid risks, and stay in their comfort zones. But as Dr. Brown explains in Rising Strong, this approach actually makes us more fragile, not stronger. Here's what she discovered through her research. The people who demonstrate the greatest resilience share 3 common characteristics. First, they recognize that falling is inevitable when you're living courageously. Second, they've developed specific practices for getting back up. And third, they understand that the goal isn't to avoid being hurt, it's to learn how to rise strong from the hurt. Dr. Brown found that resilient people have what she calls a rumble-worthy relationship with their emotions. When something goes wrong, they don't immediately jump to blame, shame, or numbing behaviors. Instead, they get curious about their experience. Let me give you a real example from the book. Brown shares the story of a woman who applied for a promotion she really wanted but didn't get it. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt or blaming others, she used Brown's Rising Strong process to examine what happened, what she learned, and how she could grow from the experience. 6 months later, she landed an even better position at another company. The key insight from Rising Strong is this: vulnerability isn't weakness, it's our greatest measure of courage. As Dr. Brown puts it, vulnerability is not winning or losing, it's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Here's your action step from this chapter. The next time you face a setback or disappointment, instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" ask, "What can this teach me?" This simple shift moves you from victim mode into learner mode, the first step in Rising Strong. Chapter 2, The Reckoning: Getting Curious About Our Stories. The first step in Dr. Brené Brown's Rising Strong process is what she calls the reckoning. This is where we get honest about our emotions and the stories we're telling ourselves about what happened. In Rising Strong, Brown explains that our brains are wired to create narratives. When something goes wrong, we immediately start constructing a story about what happened, why it happened, and what it means about us. The problem is, these first draft stories are usually incomplete and often inaccurate. Dr. Brown's research revealed that the stories we tell ourselves in moments of struggle follow predictable patterns. We tend to fill in missing information with our fears and insecurities. We make assumptions about other people's intentions. And we often default to shame-based narratives that make us the victim or the villain. Here's a powerful example from the book. Brown describes a time when her husband Steve didn't respond enthusiastically to a presentation she was excited about. Her immediate story was, "He doesn't support my work. He's jealous of my success. He doesn't believe in me." These thoughts sent her into a spiral of hurt and anger. But then she applied the reckoning process. She got curious about her emotions instead of being consumed by them. She realized she was feeling vulnerable about the presentation and was looking for validation. When she didn't get the response she expected, she created a story that protected her ego but damaged her relationship. The reckoning requires what Dr. Brown calls emotional literacy, the ability to recognize and name our emotions as they arise. Research shows that people who can accurately identify their emotions are more resilient and better at problem solving. Brown found that resilient people ask themselves three key questions during the reckoning. What emotions am I experiencing right now? What story am I telling myself about what happened? How are my emotions and this story affecting my thoughts and behaviors? This process isn't about judging your emotions or immediately trying to change them. It's about developing awareness. As Dr. Brown says in Rising Strong, we can't rise strong when we're on the run from our truth. The most important insight from this chapter is that our first emotional response to setbacks is often rooted in old patterns and past experiences, not necessarily the current reality. When we get curious instead of reactive, we create space for growth and learning. One of the most practical tools Brown shares is the SFD, the shitty first draft. When you're in the middle of a difficult situation, write down the story you're telling yourself, no matter how messy or unfair it sounds. Don't edit it. Just get it out of your head and onto paper. This simple practice helps you externalize your thoughts and emotions, making them easier to examine objectively. As Dr. Brown discovered, owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do. Your action step: the next time you experience a strong emotional reaction to a situation, pause and ask yourself, what story am I telling myself right now? Write it down without judgment. This is the beginning of rising strong. Chapter 3. The Rumble Wrestling with Truth and Reality. The second phase of Dr. Brené Brown's Rising Strong process is the rumble, and this is where the real work begins. In Rising Strong, Brown explains that rumbling means getting honest about our stories and checking them against reality. Dr. Brown discovered through her research that people who rise strong have developed the courage to challenge their initial narratives. They don't just accept their first emotional reaction as truth. Instead, they rumble with their stories, they examine them, question them, and test them against facts. The rumble is uncomfortable because it requires us to get curious about our role in difficult situations. It means asking hard questions. Where did I make assumptions? What information am I missing? How might I have contributed to this outcome? What are my patterns in similar situations? Here's a powerful example from the book. Brown shares the story of an executive who was passed over for a CEO position. His initial story was full of blame. The board was biased, politics were involved, he was treated unfairly. But during his rumble process, he got honest about areas where he could have performed better. He realized he had avoided difficult conversations, hadn't built strong enough relationships with key stakeholders, and had made assumptions about what the board valued. This wasn't about self-blame or shame. It was about taking responsibility for his part while also acknowledging factors outside his control. As Dr. Brown explains, the rumble is about being honest about our contributions to difficult situations without beating ourselves up or letting ourselves off the hook. Brown's research identified several key elements that make rumbling effective. First, you need what she calls reality checking. This means gathering actual information rather than relying solely on your emotional interpretation. Talk to people involved. Ask clarifying questions. Seek out perspectives different from your own. Second, effective rumblers practice generous assumptions. Instead of assuming the worst about other people's intentions, they consider alternative explanations. Maybe your colleague didn't respond to your email because they were overwhelmed, not because they're trying to undermine you. Third, resilient people examine their conspiracy theories, those elaborate stories we create when we don't have complete information. As Dr. Brown discovered, in the absence of data, we will always make up stories. One of the most valuable concepts in Rising Strong is what Brown calls the story I'm making up. This simple phrase has become a game changer for thousands of people. Instead of stating your interpretation as fact, you don't care about this project. You own it as your story. The story I'm making up is that you don't care about this project. This language creates space for dialogue and reduces defensiveness. It acknowledges that your perspective might be incomplete while still honoring your emotional experience. Dr. Brown also addresses what she calls the shame resilience theory during the rumble phase. She found that people who rise strong have learned to recognize shame triggers and respond to them differently. Instead of letting shame drive their behavior, they name it, reality check it, and reach out for support. The rumble requires courage because it often means acknowledging uncomfortable truths about ourselves. But as Brown's research shows, we cannot rise strong when we're on the run from truth, even if it's hard truth. Your action step from this chapter: practice the phrase, "The story I'm making up is," in your next difficult conversation. Notice how this language shifts the dynamic and creates space for understanding rather than conflict. Chapter 4: The Revolution: Writing New Stories Based on Truth. The final phase of Dr. Brené Brown's Rising Strong process is the revolution, where we write new, more truthful stories based on what we learned during our reckoning and rumble. This is where transformation actually happens. In Rising Strong, Brown explains that the revolution isn't just about feeling better. It's about fundamentally changing how we show up in the world. When we complete the Rising Strong process, we don't just recover from our fall. We become braver, more resilient, and more wholehearted. Dr. Brown's research revealed that people who consistently rise strong develop what she calls a revolutionary mindset. They begin to see setbacks not as proof of their inadequacy, but as information about their growth edges. They understand that vulnerability and courage go hand in hand. Here's how the revolution works in practice. Remember the executive from the previous chapter who was passed over for the CEO position. During his revolution phase, he wrote a new story based on the truths he discovered during his rumble. His new narrative acknowledged both the external factors he couldn't control and his own areas for growth. Instead of staying stuck in blame or shame, he used the experience as fuel for development. He worked with a coach to improve his communication skills, built stronger stakeholder relationships, and clarified his leadership vision. 18 months later, he was offered a CEO position at an even better company. The revolution phase requires what Dr. Brown calls integration, taking the insights from your reckoning and rumble and weaving them into a new way of being. This often means changing patterns that have kept you stuck. Brown identified several key elements of revolutionary thinking. First, revolutionary stories are generous and honest. They acknowledge complexity rather than seeking simple explanations. They recognize that most situations involve multiple perspectives and that people are generally doing the best they can with what they have. Second, revolutionary stories are action-oriented. Instead of focusing solely on what went wrong, they identify specific steps for moving forward. They answer the question, based on what I've learned, how will I approach similar situations differently? Third, people who write revolutionary stories practice what Dr. Brown calls rumbling with vulnerability. They don't try to protect themselves from future hurt by building walls or avoiding risks. Instead, they develop better skills for navigating vulnerability when it arises. One of the most powerful concepts in this chapter is what Brown terms the conspiracy theory versus reality check. She found that when we're hurt or disappointed, we often create elaborate explanations that make us feel better temporarily but keep us stuck long-term. Revolutionary stories are grounded in reality, not in protective fantasies. Dr. Brown also addresses the importance of boundaries during the revolution phase. Rising strong doesn't mean being a doormat or accepting poor treatment. It means developing clear boundaries about what you will and won't accept while staying open to growth and connection. The research shows that people who master the Rising Strong process experience what Brown calls post-traumatic growth. They don't just return to their baseline after difficult experiences. They actually become stronger, more confident, and more capable. As Dr. Brown puts it in Rising Strong, the middle is messy, but it's also where the magic happens. The revolution is where we transform our messiest experiences into our greatest sources of strength. Your action step: think of a recent setback or disappointment. Write 3 versions of the story. Your initial emotional reaction, what you discovered during honest examination, and a new story based on truth that includes specific actions for moving forward. Chapter 5, The Vulnerability Armory, How We Protect Ourselves from Pain. In Rising Strong, Dr. Brené Brown dedicates significant attention to what she calls the vulnerability armory, the sophisticated ways we protect ourselves from emotional exposure and potential hurt. Understanding these protective strategies is crucial for the Rising Strong process because they often keep us stuck in patterns that prevent growth. Through her extensive research, Brown discovered that when people feel vulnerable, they instinctively reach for armor. This armor comes in many forms, but it always serves the same purpose: to protect us from the discomfort of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Dr. Brown identified 3 primary pieces of vulnerability armor that show up repeatedly in her research. The first is foreboding joy, the practice of never fully leaning into happiness because we're afraid it won't last. People who struggle with foreboding joy find themselves waiting for the other shoe to drop, even during their happiest moments. The second piece of armor is perfectionism. Brown is careful to distinguish perfectionism from healthy striving. As she explains in Rising Strong, perfectionism isn't about setting high standards. It's about trying to earn approval and avoid shame through flawless performance. Perfectionists believe that if they can just do everything perfectly, they can avoid criticism, judgment, and blame. The third major piece of armor is numbing. When vulnerability becomes too uncomfortable, people often turn to behaviors that help them avoid feeling. This might be overwork, overeating, excessive shopping, binge-watching television, or substance use. Numbing provides temporary relief but prevents us from developing resilience. Here's a powerful example from the book. Brown shares the story of a woman who had built her entire identity around being the strong one in her family. When she faced a personal crisis, she couldn't ask for help because it threatened her self-concept. Her armor of invulnerability was actually making her more fragile, not stronger. The problem with armor, as Dr. Brown discovered, is that it doesn't just protect us from pain. It also protects us from love, joy, and authentic connection. When we armor up against vulnerability, we can't selectively numb emotions. We end up dampening all of our feelings, including the positive ones. Brown's research revealed that people who rise strong have learned to recognize their armor and make conscious choices about when to use it. They understand that some situations genuinely require protection, but they don't live their entire lives defended against vulnerability. One of the most insightful concepts in this chapter is what Brown calls comparative suffering. This is the tendency to rank pain and use it as armor against empathy. People might think, at least my problems aren't as bad as theirs, or other people have it worse, so I shouldn't complain. This comparison prevents us from honestly acknowledging our own struggles. Dr. Brown also addresses shame shields, the stories we tell ourselves to avoid feeling shame. Common shame shields include blame, it's their fault; perfectionism, if I'm perfect, I can't be criticized; and numbing, I don't care anyway. These shields might provide temporary relief, but they prevent the honest reckoning necessary for growth. The key insight from Rising Strong is that armor is often unconscious. We develop these protective strategies early in life, and they become so automatic that we don't even realize we're using them. The first step in changing these patterns is developing awareness. Brown suggests practicing what she calls armor inventory. Regularly ask yourself, how am I protecting myself from vulnerability right now? What am I afraid will happen if I let my guard down? Is this protection serving me, or is it keeping me stuck? One of the most practical tools from this chapter is learning to lean into discomfort. Instead of immediately reaching for armor when you feel vulnerable, Dr. Brown suggests pausing and breathing through the discomfort. Ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to tell me? What would courage look like in this moment? Your action step: identify your go-to piece of vulnerability armor. Is it perfectionism, numbing, staying busy? For the next week, notice when you reach for this armor and ask yourself, what am I trying to avoid feeling right now? Chapter 6, Shame and Empathy, the Currency of Connection. One of the most groundbreaking aspects of Rising Strong is Dr. Brené Brown's exploration of shame and its antidote: empathy. Her research revealed that understanding shame and learning to respond to it with self-compassion is essential for anyone who wants to rise strong from difficult experiences. Dr. Brown defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. This is different from guilt, which focuses on behavior. I did something bad, while shame focuses on identity. I am bad. In her studies, Brown discovered that shame is highly correlated with depression, anxiety, addiction, and suicide. But here's the crucial insight from Rising Strong. Shame is also highly correlated with perfectionism, numbing, and violence. In other words, shame doesn't just make us feel bad, it drives destructive behaviors. The research shows that shame thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment. When we experience shame, our instinct is often to hide, to keep the painful experience to ourselves. But this isolation actually feeds the shame and makes it grow stronger. Here's where empathy becomes crucial. Dr. Brown found that empathy is the antidote to shame. When we share our shame experiences with someone who responds with empathy, someone who can connect with our experience and communicate that we're not alone, shame begins to lose its power. Brown is careful to distinguish empathy from sympathy. Sympathy says, I feel sorry for you. Empathy says, I've been there too, and you're not alone. Empathy requires vulnerability from both people, the courage to share pain and the courage to sit with someone in their pain. Let me share a powerful example from the book. Brown describes a workshop participant who shared that she had been struggling with alcohol addiction. Instead of judgment or advice, the group responded with empathy. Several people shared their own struggles with various forms of numbing. This connection didn't solve her addiction, but it broke the shame that was keeping her isolated and preventing her from seeking help. One of the most practical insights from Rising Strong is Brown's research on shame resilience. She discovered that people who don't get stuck in shame spirals have developed specific skills for responding to shame when it arises. First, they can recognize shame triggers and symptoms. They know what shame feels like in their body, the physical sensations that signal shame is present. This might be heat in their face, tension in their chest, or a sick feeling in their stomach. Second, they practice reality-checking shame messages. Instead of accepting shame's narrative, I'm not good enough, they examine whether the message is based in truth or fear. They ask questions like, is this criticism constructive feedback or an attack on my worth as a person? Third, they reach out for support. Instead of isolating when they feel shame, they connect with trusted people who can provide empathy and perspective. As Dr. Brown puts it, if we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't survive. Fourth, they speak shame stories out loud. Brown's research shows that shame loses its power when it's brought into the light. Naming shame experiences and sharing them appropriately helps neutralize their emotional charge. Dr. Brown also addresses what she calls empathy misses, times when we try to help someone but actually increase their shame. Common empathy misses include trying to fix the problem, minimizing the pain, at least, or making it about our own experience. True empathy requires what Brown calls perspective-taking, the ability to see the world through someone else's eyes without losing sight of your own perspective. It requires emotional boundaries that allow you to be present without being overwhelmed. The connection to Rising Strong is clear. When we respond to our own setbacks with self-compassion instead of shame, we recover faster and learn more from the experience. When others respond to our struggles with empathy, we feel supported in our growth rather than judged for our imperfection. Your action step: practice responding to your inner critic with self-compassion. When you notice shame-based self-talk, ask yourself, how would I respond to a good friend who was experiencing this situation? Then offer yourself that same kindness. Chapter 7. Curiosity and Grounded Confidence, the Courage to Learn. In Rising Strong, Dr. Brené Brown identifies curiosity as one of the most powerful tools for resilience. Her research revealed that people who bounce back from setbacks approach their difficulties with genuine curiosity rather than immediate judgment or defensiveness. Dr. Brown discovered that curiosity and shame cannot coexist. When we get curious about our experiences, when we approach our struggles with a genuine desire to learn and understand, shame begins to dissipate. Curiosity opens up possibilities, while shame shuts them down. The challenge is that curiosity requires what Brown calls grounded confidence, a deep belief that we are worthy of love and belonging regardless of our performance or achievements. Without this foundation, Curiosity feels too risky because we're afraid of what we might discover about ourselves. Here's how this plays out in real life. When someone with grounded confidence receives critical feedback, they get curious. What can I learn from this? How might this help me grow? What part of this feedback is useful? When someone without grounded confidence receives the same feedback, they either get defensive or spiral into shame. In Rising Strong, Brown shares the story of a leader who received devastating feedback from her team. Instead of getting defensive or dismissing the criticism, she got curious. She scheduled individual conversations with each team member to understand their perspectives better. She discovered patterns in her behavior that she hadn't noticed before. While the feedback was painful, her curiosity allowed her to transform it into meaningful change. Dr. Brown's research identified several key components of productive curiosity. First, curious people ask open-ended questions rather than leading questions. Instead of, "Don't you think I handled that well?" they ask, "How did that come across to you?" Second, they separate their worth from their performance. They can receive information about their behavior without interpreting it as evidence about their value as human beings. This separation allows them to stay curious even when the information is uncomfortable. Third, curious people practice what Brown calls staying small when gathering information. Instead of asking huge questions like, "What's wrong with me?" they ask specific questions like, "What happened in that moment when the conversation shifted?" Grounded confidence, according to Dr. Brown's research, is built through practice specifically, the practice of rumbling with vulnerability. Each time we face a difficult experience with curiosity instead of defensiveness, we build evidence that we can handle truth about ourselves. This evidence becomes the foundation for deeper confidence. One of the most powerful tools Brown shares is the practice of getting curious about curiosity. When you notice yourself getting defensive or shutting down, ask, "What am I afraid I might learn here? What's making it feel unsafe to be curious right now?" Dr. Brown also addresses the difference between knowing and learning. People who struggle to rise strong often approach difficulties from a place of needing to already know the answers. They're afraid to admit confusion or uncertainty. People with grounded confidence are comfortable saying, "I don't know, but I'm willing to learn." This connects to what Brown calls the vulnerability-shame-resilience connection. The more we practice being vulnerable, sharing our uncertainties, asking for help, admitting mistakes, the more resilient we become to shame. And the more resilient we become to shame, the more curious we can be about our experiences. The research shows that curiosity is particularly important during the rumble phase of rising strong. When we're examining our stories and checking them against reality, curiosity helps us stay open to information that might challenge our initial narratives. Dr. Brown found that curious people also develop better relationships. When we approach others with genuine curiosity about their experiences and perspectives, rather than judgment or the need to be right, we create deeper connections and more productive conversations. One practical strategy from Rising Strong is what Brown calls the learner's mindset. Before entering difficult conversations or challenging situations, curious people remind themselves, "I'm here to learn, not to be right." This intention shapes how they listen and respond. Your action step. For the next week, replace the phrase, "I know," with "I'm learning" whenever possible. Notice how this shift affects your openness to new information and your willingness to stay curious in challenging situations. Chapter 8, Rumbling with Values, Living by What Matters Most. One of the most transformative aspects of Rising Strong is Dr. Brené Brown's emphasis on values-based living. Her research revealed that people who consistently rise strong from setbacks have clarity about their core values and use these values as a compass during difficult times. Dr. Brown defines values as a way of being or believing that we hold most important. But here's the crucial insight from her research. Most people have never taken the time to clearly identify their values, which means they're navigating life without a reliable internal compass. In Rising Strong, Brown explains that values become especially important during what she calls rumbles, those times when we're wrestling with difficult emotions and challenging situations. When we're clear about our values, we can ask ourselves, what would integrity look like in this situation? How can I respond in a way that aligns with who I want to be? The research shows that people who live in alignment with their values experience less anxiety, make decisions more confidently, and recover from setbacks more quickly. They have what Brown calls moral resilience, the ability to stay true to their beliefs even under pressure. Here's a powerful example from the book. Brown shares the story of a woman who was facing workplace bullying from her supervisor. Her initial reaction was to either fight back aggressively or quit immediately. But when she got clear about her values, which included courage, integrity, and compassion, she found a third option. She documented the behavior, sought support from HR, and addressed the situation in a way that stood up for herself while maintaining her dignity. Dr. Brown's research identified several common challenges people face when trying to live by their values. First, many people have too many values. When everything is important, nothing is important. Brown suggests identifying your top 2 core values, the ones that are non-negotiable for you. Second, people often confuse values with goals or strategies. Success isn't a value, it's an outcome. Hard work might be a strategy for achieving your values, but the underlying value might be excellence or contribution. Third, many people hold inherited values that aren't actually their own. These are values they absorbed from family, culture, or society without conscious choice. Rising strong often requires examining whether your stated values actually reflect your authentic beliefs. One of the most practical tools in Rising Strong is Brown's values clarification exercise. She provides a list of values and asks readers to narrow it down to their top 2. This process often reveals surprising insights about what truly matters most to you. Dr. Brown also addresses what she calls values gaps, the space between what we say we value and how we actually behave. These gaps create internal tension and make us more vulnerable to shame. Closing values gaps is essential for building integrity and self-trust. The connection to Rising Strong is profound. When we face setbacks or failures, our values become our anchor. Instead of being swept away by emotion or reactivity, we can ask, what response would honor my values? How can I handle this situation in a way that reflects who I truly am? Brown's research showed that values-based responses to difficulties often look different from our initial emotional reactions. They require what she calls rumbling with discomfort, choosing the harder path because it aligns with our integrity, even when easier options are available. Dr. Brown also explores how values show up in relationships. When both people are clear about their values, they can have more honest conversations about expectations and boundaries. They can address conflicts by returning to shared values rather than getting stuck in positions. One particularly insightful section of Rising Strong deals with values in leadership. Brown found that leaders who are clear about their values and consistently model them create psychological safety for their teams. People feel more comfortable taking risks and admitting mistakes when they trust their leader's integrity. The research also reveals that values-based living requires ongoing attention. Values aren't something you identify once and forget about. They need to be regularly revisited and consciously practiced. Brown suggests regular values check-ins, where you examine whether your recent choices and behaviors align with what matters most to you. Dr. Brown addresses the courage required for values-based living. Sometimes living by your values means disappointing people, setting boundaries, or taking stands that aren't popular. But her research consistently shows that people who compromise their values to avoid conflict or gain approval ultimately experience more suffering, not less. Your action step: identify your top 2 core values. For the next week, before making any significant decision, ask yourself, which option best honors my values? Notice how this filter affects your choices and your confidence in those choices. Chapter 9, Cultivating Gratitude and Joy, the Practice of Wholeheartedness. In Rising Strong, Dr. Brené Brown reveals a surprising discovery from her research. Gratitude and joy aren't just nice feelings. They're essential practices for resilience and rising strong. Her studies showed that people who demonstrate the greatest emotional resilience actively cultivate gratitude and practice what she calls joyful living. Dr. Brown discovered that resilient people don't just wait for gratitude and joy to show up naturally. They practice gratitude as a discipline and create intentional space for joy in their lives. This isn't about positive thinking or denying difficult realities. It's about training our minds to notice and appreciate what's working, even in the midst of struggle. The research revealed something counterintuitive. Gratitude and joy require vulnerability. Being grateful means acknowledging that good things in our lives could change or be taken away. Experiencing joy means opening ourselves to the possibility of loss. This is why many people unconsciously resist these positive emotions. In Rising Strong, Brown introduces the concept of foreboding joy, the tendency to automatically anticipate loss or disappointment when we're experiencing happiness. People who struggle with foreboding joy find themselves thinking things like, "This is too good to last," or "Something bad is about to happen." Here's a powerful example from the book. Brown describes a mother who couldn't fully enjoy watching her children play because she was constantly imagining all the ways they could get hurt. Her attempt to protect herself from potential pain was actually robbing her of present joy and making her more anxious, not less vulnerable. Dr. Brown's research showed that the antidote to foreboding joy isn't trying to control outcomes, it's practicing gratitude. When we feel joy, instead of immediately moving to fear, we can pause and say, "I'm grateful for this moment." This practice helps us lean into happiness rather than bracing against imagined future pain. The connection to Rising Strong is significant. People who regularly practice gratitude develop what Brown calls resilience reserves. When difficult experiences arise, they have a foundation of appreciation and positive emotion to draw from. They don't forget that life contains goodness even when they're going through hard times. Dr. Brown distinguishes between gratitude as an attitude and gratitude as a practice. Gratitude as an attitude is simply feeling thankful when good things happen. Gratitude as a practice involves intentionally noticing and acknowledging positive aspects of life, even ordinary ones. The research showed that people who practice gratitude don't necessarily have better lives. They have better awareness of the good things already present in their lives. This awareness becomes a source of strength during challenging periods. One of the most practical tools in Rising Strong is what Brown calls gratitude practices that stick. She found that effective gratitude practices are specific rather than general. Instead of "I'm grateful for my family," try "I'm grateful for the way my daughter laughed at dinner tonight." The specificity helps our brains actually register and remember positive experiences. Dr. Brown also addresses the relationship between gratitude and scarcity thinking. Many people resist gratitude because they're afraid it will make them complacent or less driven to improve their circumstances. But her research showed the opposite. Grateful people are more likely to take positive action because they're operating from a foundation of abundance rather than fear. The joy component of this chapter focuses on what Brown calls small moments of joy. Her research revealed that resilient people don't wait for major celebrations or achievements to experience joy. They find ways to celebrate ordinary moments: a good cup of coffee, a text from a friend, a beautiful sunset. Dr. Brown found that joy is often experienced in community. Shared laughter, collective celebration, and communal rituals all contribute to what she calls joyful living. People who rise strong understand that joy multiplies when it's shared, and that celebrating others' successes increases their own capacity for happiness. One insight from Rising Strong is that joy and gratitude require presence. We can't experience appreciation for what's happening if we're constantly focused on what's missing or what might go wrong. This connects back to earlier themes in the book about staying grounded in reality rather than getting lost in stories about the future. Dr. Brown also addresses cultural barriers to joy and gratitude. Some families or communities view happiness with suspicion, treating it as selfish or superficial. Learning to experience joy and gratitude might require challenging inherited beliefs about what's acceptable or safe to feel. The practice of gratitude and joy becomes especially important during the revolution phase of Rising Strong. After we've learned from our struggles, gratitude helps us appreciate both the growth and the support that helped us through difficult times. Joy gives us energy to integrate our learning and move forward with hope. Your action step: start a daily gratitude practice that focuses on specifics. Each evening, write down 3 specific things you're grateful for from that day, including why each one matters to you. Notice how this practice affects your overall resilience and outlook. Chapter 10: Wholehearted Living, the Daily Practice of Rising Strong. The culmination of Rising Strong is Dr. Brené Brown's vision of wholehearted living, a way of being in the world that integrates all the practices and insights from her research on resilience, vulnerability, and courage. Wholehearted living isn't a destination you reach. It's a daily practice of choosing courage, compassion, and connection. Dr. Brown discovered through her research that people who live wholeheartedly share common characteristics, but they aren't born different from everyone else. They've simply developed practices that support their emotional resilience and authentic expression. Most importantly, they understand that wholehearted living requires ongoing attention and commitment. In Rising Strong, Brown emphasizes that wholehearted people still face setbacks, disappointments, and failures. The difference is in how they respond to these inevitable human experiences. They've developed what she calls a rising strong practice, a reliable process for navigating difficulty that allows them to emerge stronger and wiser. The research revealed that wholehearted living involves what Brown calls the daily practice of letting go. This means releasing perfectionism, letting go of what other people think, and giving up the illusion of control. It means choosing authenticity over approval, courage over comfort, and curiosity over certainty. Here's what this looks like in practice. Wholehearted people still feel scared when taking risks, but they don't let fear make their decisions. They still experience disappointment when things don't work out, but they don't let disappointment define their worth. They still face criticism, but they don't let other people's opinions determine their actions. Dr. Brown identified several key practices that support wholehearted living. First is cultivating self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend. This means recognizing that struggle and imperfection are part of the human experience, not evidence of personal failure. Second is practicing gratitude and joy, which we explored in the previous chapter. Wholehearted people make space for positive emotions and don't let fear of loss prevent them from fully experiencing good moments. Third is intuition and trusting faith, developing confidence in your inner wisdom while also staying open to growth and change. This involves learning to distinguish between the voice of fear and the voice of intuition, and making decisions based on your values rather than your anxieties. Fourth is creativity, not necessarily artistic expression, but the willingness to think differently, try new approaches, and express your authentic self in whatever ways feel meaningful to you. One of the most powerful insights in Rising Strong is Brown's explanation of how wholehearted living affects relationships. When we show up authentically with our imperfections, struggles, and genuine emotions, we give others permission to do the same. This creates deeper, more satisfying connections than relationships based on pretense or performance. Dr. Brown also addresses the challenges of living wholeheartedly in a culture that often rewards armor and perfectionism. She acknowledges that choosing vulnerability and authenticity can feel risky, especially in competitive environments or judgmental communities. The key is developing what Brown calls shame resilience, the ability to recognize shame when it arises and respond to it in healthy ways. This might mean reaching out for support, reality-checking shame messages, or simply naming the experience. I'm feeling shame right now, and that's making me want to hide. Wholehearted living also requires boundaries. Dr. Brown's research showed that the most compassionate people are also the most boundaried people. They understand that saying no to what doesn't align with their values allows them to say yes more fully to what does matter. The connection between wholehearted living and rising strong is cyclical. Each time we practice rising strong, moving through reckoning, rumbling, and revolution, we build our capacity for wholehearted living. And the more we live wholeheartedly, the more resilient we become when difficulties arise. Dr. Brown emphasizes that this isn't about becoming invulnerable to pain or never making mistakes. Wholehearted people still experience the full range of human emotions and struggles. The difference is that they've developed reliable practices for moving through difficulties without losing their sense of worth or connection. One of the most practical aspects of wholehearted living is what Brown calls daily practices. These are small, consistent actions that reinforce wholehearted values. This might include morning reflection, evening gratitude, regular connection with loved ones, or creative expression. The research shows that wholehearted living has a ripple effect. When we model courage, compassion, and authenticity, we create permission for others to do the same. We contribute to creating environments, whether in families, workplaces, or communities, where people feel safer to be real. As Dr. Brown concludes in Rising Strong, wholehearted living isn't about perfection, it's about practice. It's about choosing again and again to show up, be seen, and live from a place of worthiness. It's about understanding that our struggles don't disqualify us from love and belonging. They're simply part of what makes us human. Your action step. Choose one wholehearted practice to implement daily for the next month. This could be gratitude journaling, boundary setting, creative expression, or self-compassion. Notice how this practice affects your resilience and relationships. Conclusion. Over the past minutes, we've journeyed through Dr. Brené Brown's groundbreaking research in Rising Strong, a book that has fundamentally changed how millions of people approach resilience, vulnerability, and personal growth. Let's recap the revolutionary three-step process that Dr. Brown discovered. The reckoning, where we get honest about our emotions and the stories we're telling ourselves. The rumble, where we challenge those stories and wrestle with truth. And the revolution, where we write new, more accurate narratives that guide us forward. We've explored how vulnerability isn't weakness, it's our greatest measure of courage. We've learned that the armor we use to protect ourselves often keeps us from the very connections and growth we desire. We've discovered that shame loses its power when met with empathy and self-compassion. Dr. Brown's research shows us that curiosity and grounded confidence are essential for growth, that living by our values provides an internal compass during difficult times, and that gratitude and joy aren't just nice feelings, they're essential practices for resilience. Most importantly, we've learned that rising strong isn't about avoiding failure or pain. As Dr. Brown says, if we are brave enough often enough, we will fall. The question isn't whether we'll face setbacks, it's whether we'll develop the skills to rise stronger from them. The people who live the most fulfilling lives aren't those who never struggle. They're the ones who have learned to navigate struggle with courage, curiosity, and compassion. They understand that their worthiness isn't tied to their performance, and that their struggles are part of their story, not the end of it. Here's what I want you to remember from Rising Strong. You are worthy of love and belonging exactly as you are right now. Your imperfections don't disqualify you from joy, success, or meaningful relationships. Your struggles are not evidence of weakness. They're evidence that you're brave enough to show up and be seen. The practices Dr. Brown outlines in Rising Strong, reckoning with your emotions, rumbling with your stories, writing new narratives based on truth, these aren't one-time activities. They're lifelong practices that get easier and more natural with repetition. Start small. The next time you face a setback or disappointment, try asking yourself, what story am I telling myself about this situation? Practice getting curious instead of immediately defensive. Notice your armor and ask whether it's serving you or keeping you stuck. Remember that Rising Strong is not about individual heroism. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and supporting each other through the inevitable challenges of being human. As Dr. Brown reminds us, we are wired for connection, and our struggles become lighter when we don't carry them alone. The world needs people who are willing to rise strong, who can face difficulty with grace, learn from failure, and continue showing up with open hearts. By practicing the principles in Rising Strong, you're not just changing your own life, you're contributing to a more courageous, compassionate world. Your journey of rising strong starts now. Take the first step. Get curious about your story, trust in your ability to learn and grow. And remember, you are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and more worthy of love than you can imagine.